Hi, Pastor Raymond. It is again a privilege to have you tonight with us. And we thank you for the time that you spent with us, especially after a bit of a mishap on the previous recording that we had to do. But we fortunately
in Australia.
Yeah, so fortunately we can carry on doing this one. All right, so again, like I said, I've got the questions here on the right hand side. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right,
yes.
Pastor Raymond, I give over to you on end time study, and we are here to listen and to learn.
Thank you, Andre. What a wonderful privilege to speak here from South Africa to people down under, and I believe other places in the world also. Andre, I just read your first question. At the birth of Jesus, there's mention of wise men. How do we know there were 3 wise men? Was it because of the 3 gifts? Andre, it is just a legend. It's a myth that there were 3 wise men. It's nowhere stated in the Bible. It is unchristian to teach there were 3 wise men. It's unbiblical doctrine. I think you're quite right in the second part of the question when people ask, was it because of the 3 gifts? And of course, it could be because of the 3 gifts. But of course, it could be that these wise men, that they bring it in groups of 2 or 3, their gifts. So we don't know. So as to the first question, it's only guessing, and your guess is as good as mine. I think it's just because of in the old Bible books, when you see the pictures of the children Bible, you always see 3 wise men standing there, with their gifts. So I want to say, there's nothing to say about this. What is amazing, Andre, is where did the 3 wise men come from?
From the east.
Correct. And it was at the birth of Christ.
Yep.
King.
Yep.
Did you know that there were also wise men just before Jesus' death? We read that the Bible says in John chapter 12 that the Greeks came and they forcefully said they would like to see Jesus. Now, Greece is northwest from Israel. And just the 2-3 days before Jesus was crucified, we find these wise men, the Greek, that want to ask about Christ because they come to worship at the feast. So they were believers in the sense of they believed in God. So I just want to say, is it not interesting? We find in the Bible wise men from the east and wise men from the west in the birth and at the end of Christ's life.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Yes.
So they were. So you say they were believers in God.
Yes, because they did come to the feast.
Yeah, and believed the prophecy that Jesus will be born.
Right.
And that's why they.
So they were there. Yes, because they believed they were proselytes, believing in Judaism, which that was the religion of the day. Yeah. So very interesting that these Greek brethren that were there, the Bible in the original, in the Koine Greek says emphatically, they said, we want to see Jesus. It's not just a request. It is the Bible, it is in the continuous grammatical writing. In other words, they keep on saying, we want to see Jesus. No, we're not taking no for an answer. Please, we want Jesus to come and be with us. We also want to see Jesus. He's not only for the Jews, but also for the Greek. And then, Jesus answered, of course, I would love to do it, but it's unfortunately not possible because the hour of the Son of Man has come. I need to go to the cross. The corn of wheat need to die now, and it will bring forth much fruit. So just interesting that me and you discuss this on your first question.
Yeah, very, very interesting.
Yes. Your second question, what does it mean that there will be scoffers in the last days? Please explain. I don't think that I need to say much because Jesus in Luke chapter 17 and Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3, both Jesus and Peter, speaking of the last days, talk about people that will be scoffers in the last days. In other words, looking at the days of Noah, when Noah said the end is coming, people just laugh at him. And he was preaching for 120 years, and people were just laughing at him that he says it's going to be rain.
Sure.
And they wouldn't believe him. And now Peter says that the Lord told him in 2 Peter 3, explains that in the last days, people will act like that again. So I think the question, what does it mean there will be scoffers in last days? It actually just means that what happened in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot, when the angels warned them of the judgment coming, people just shrugged it off. The sons-in-law to be of Lot, they just shrugged it off. They wouldn't believe the angels, neither would they believe Noah. And I think, the answer to this question is, it is the world that will not believe. Christians believe in the second coming in the last days. So I think scoffers, there will always be.
Yeah.
God haters, there will always be.
Yeah.
Those that shun Jesus away, they will always be.
Yeah.
But there will be a moment when the door of the ark will be closed.
Yeah.
There will be a moment when fire and hell and brimstone rain down again on the earth in Revelation 20, like what happened in the days of Lot. So it will happen. Doesn't matter what the world says, my brother.
It's definitely going to happen. Yeah, that is, interesting. And, if you look at the world and you look at how little, a small part of the world is actually there for Jesus, because there's so many people that is just openly not believers. They are atheists and not calling themselves atheists, but they just don't believe in anything about God. And especially here with us in Australia, you see that quite a lot. And so it's a bit of a, it's for us to spread the gospel, but it's for them to accept or not.
Yes. Andre, I think if you look at the world population, 7.8 billion people, and there's only around about 2 billion, rounded off now, Christians or to profess, and not all of them are born again, then you can see the ratio. And you could rather say, if we say there's about 1.3, 1.5 billion truly born again Christians, then the ratio would be something in the vicinity of 1.1 to 5, 1 to 6, which means, 5 or 6 of every person out of every one that walk on the earth just wouldn't accept, that God is, that Jesus died for them. So this is the world that we live in. But getting to your third question that you asked me, Andre, and that was about Russia and about what is the biblical significance of what happened between Russia and the Ukraine. I would like to first say this very clearly. The Bible is very clear in Ezekiel chapter 38 that Russia have a role to play in the end time. That is a fact. Like, for instance, it says, a son of man, set your face against Gog of the land Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I'm against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, it also speaks of Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya, to Garma, Gomer, and far north with its troops. So this is in the first 7 verses of Ezekiel 38. Knowing that the heading says Gog and allies attack Israel, knowing that we talk about the end time, so it is not far-fetched, Andre, your question that you posed, it's really not far-fetched to say, does the Bible have something to say what happened when Russia steps up to the forefront in world history or in the happenings of the world in the end time?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. Yes, it does. Are we trying to read things in the Bible? No, this is not the case. So I would like just to make a few comments, if you allow me.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Andre, 2,600 years ago, the prophet Ezekiel, he predicted that in the last days, Russia would impose its power on the world. Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39 describes how the nations will invade Israel, and it includes, Andre, Russia and a coalition of 10 nations. That is going to happen. And actual fact, your question about Russia and Ukraine at this very, very moment, and I'm looking at my world map now, I can tell you right now, that is a given that these things are going to take place. Maybe in the beginning, I would like to make this few comments. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, he has it in for the West. Make no mistake. You know, he hates Western democracy.
Yeah.
So after the Second World War, there was a dark cloud of a possible nuclear war that hung over the world. And you will remember when we were very young, we talk about the Cold War between Russia and America. You will remember, especially since 1947 to 1991, we always had this Cold War play in the world. You remember, me and you grow up with that.
Yeah.
But that was until 1991. Then things changed in the world, and we know what happened when the Iron Curtain came down.
Yeah.
Now, where I'm at the moment, Andre, in the current absence of American will and the collapse of the Middle East, because the Middle East going for democracy, many of the Muslim nations, the Arab nations, what and who will prevent Russia from rising again?
Yeah.
So Russia has started to come to the fore, and it has entered the world stage aggressively.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it. Now, if we follow biblical prophecy, according to Ezekiel, it will be Russia that will unleash a world war like no other. And today, we see the signs. And that signs that we see cast a long shadow over the future. So, you know, your question, I could change it and I could say, does Bible prophecy have anything to say about this? That's what's happening currently in the world. You know,
Definitely.
because we are 2,600 years down the line since the days Ezekiel prophesied about Russia.
Exactly.
So it brings me to this. I think, Andre, we can rightly talk today about the Russian awakening. Now, when I talk about the Russian awakening, I mean, I'm talking about apart from the Battle of Armageddon, the war of Gog and Magog, as prophesied in Ezekiel 38, 39, 2,600 years ago. It is the second most prominent end-time prophetic war in the Bible when Russia get involved. So the people we know today as Russia, they are prominent in Ezekiel 38. The name Rosh identifies the nation that will lead the coalition, the attack in the last days against Israel. So you read Rosh, Andre, in Ezekiel 38 verse 2, 38 verse 3, and 39 verse 1. Now, Bible scholars identify Rosh as Russia. The prophet Daniel describes the leader who will orchestrate the attack against Israel in the last days as the king of the north.
Yeah.
And who is the most northern kingdom in the world today?
Russia.
Russia.
Yeah.
You see, and Daniel 11, verse 5 to 35, always talk about the king of the north. First Syria, and then to the borders further of the north. You actually read in Ezekiel 38, verse 6, Gomer and all its troops, the house of Tugarma, from the far north, and all its troops, many people that are with you.
Wow.
Now, who is far north?
Yeah.
It's Russia.
Clearly.
Very clearly. So there's only one nation, Andre, people, one group of people, ethnic group, that geographically occupies a position in the far corners of the north, or in the back corners of the north, as we read in other portions in the Bible, in relation to the nation of Israel, and that is Russia. You see, its land mass, if you study, I love to study geography when I was young. If you study geography, you will discover that the land mass of Russia, Andre, the land mass extends from the Baltic Sea, which is just northwest of the Mediterranean Sea, to the Bering Sea. So that whole land mass today is known as Russia.
Yeah.
With all its people. And it brings me to understand about the Russia awakening. Maybe we should also talk about the Russian alliance.
Yeah.
Because if we look at the book of Ezekiel, he identifies nations that will form a coalition, an alliance to attack Israel in the days of the Great Tribulation. And I think that's why you posed me this question, because actually behind your question is, how far are we from the Great Tribulation?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Am I right?
You're 100% right.
Yeah. That was also thinking. Hey.
Yeah, you definitely had it very, it was a long shot, but it was there. And that's good.
Right. Okay. So in other words, because I mean, me and you are very interested in the coming of the Great Tribulation, because we know the rapture precedes the Great Tribulation, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So Andre, Russia, there is a leader of the alliance that the Bible calls here Gog, G-O-G. But the Bible nowhere says that Gog comes from Russia. The Bible do not say that.
Yeah.
But the Bible named this person that will be in the lead as Gog.
Yeah.
Now, all the other names in prophecy refers to lands. But Gog refers to a person, the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Because Gog means high, head, or chief.
Yeah.
So if it's a title in today's term, we can talk about a president or a pharaoh.
Yeah.
So it describes the Antichrist, and of course, under his leadership will be Russia. Rosh will attack Israel. So God is the center of many armies. Something very interesting to note here. When you study Ezekiel very closely, you will find in verse 2, Magog. Did you know that Magog was the son of Japheth, the son of Noah? In other words, Magog is one of Noah's sons, and they are called today the Scythians. If you say to me, who is these people? These people, they live in today's world between the Black and Caspian seas. So if you look geographically and you study your world map, that's where you will find them. They were formerly part of the Soviet Union. Today, these countries, you will hear it immediately when I say it: Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan.
All the Sun nations.
Sun nations, yes. And do you know what they have in common, Andre? They're all Islam.
Wow. That's interesting.
That's a very interesting fact.
Yeah.
If we look at Meshech and Tubal, according to Genesis, the fifth and sixth sons of Japheth, and they are all sons of Noah now, because Japheth was one of his three sons. We see it means modern Turkey.
Yeah.
And of course, they feature quite a lot in the news. I think you guys in Australia also sees it a lot. Then in verse 5, we read in Ezekiel, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya. Now, Persia, we know that Persia speaks of Iran. And until as far as 1935, just the other day, Persia only then changed its name from Persia to Iran.
Yeah.
In 1934, in 1934, Iran was known as Persia. So, and now we also see Ethiopia, the Kushites, that's North Africa, Put and Gomer and Togarma. Now, when we take all these nations of Southern Europe, the North Africa, and we take the stun countries in Russia, then we see, and especially Iran and Iraq and Syria, you can see something very clearly, Andre. You can see North Africa, Southern Europe, the Middle East, the stun countries, and Russia has a big role to play in end-time prophecy.
So just in saying what you just said, what is the possibility that the Antichrist will come from those nations?
He's going to come out of one of them 100%.
That's what I thought.
Having said that, let's just go back to your initial question. The initial question was, does Russia and the Ukraine and the war that's taking place at the moment, does that say something about Bible prophecy? So here's where I'm at. Ezekiel 38:39 speaks of the Armageddon battle that has to come. At the end of the 7-year tribulation. So we do know something. The northern forces of Russia, Turkey, the EU countries, in Southern Europe especially, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Libya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, they're all going to be part of the Antichrist kingdom to come. His domain. Now, as to your question, because I've given you now a little bit of Bible history. Now, as to the question in modern time, right now, where me and you are today, what we see is a resurrection of Russia in modern day time.
Definitely. So, if we look at the Ukraine war between Russia and Ukraine, I think it's more a stepping stone towards Israel on the end of the day.
Right. So now that's getting interesting what you've just said. So what Russia's actually doing is flexing his muscles. And he wants to enlarge his territory. Right. So what you see, we know that a few years ago in 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, which is actually part of the southern peninsula of the Ukraine. Because maybe I can just mention this. I don't know if you knew it, Andre, but did you know that Ukraine was part of the old Russian Empire from 1721 to 1917? You talk of roughly 240 years prior to 1917. Ukraine were part of the old Russia Empire. But since 1922 to 1991, Ukraine was known as the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic. But Putin, he has this great ideal, and that is to make Ukraine part of the old Russian Empire.
And get rid of the Nazis.
Right. Hence his invasion and war with Ukraine at the moment, to bring them under his power. So here's where I'm at. It is very clear that the Russians want to expand their territory at the expense of other countries. And that were previously part of the Russian Empire. Remember, they're not trying to attack the world at the moment. They are attacking nations and they will take Belarus. They will look at Moldova. They will look at these countries, not only Ukraine. They've already looked at Crimea, to bring them all that were previously part of the old Russian Empire. I mean, Russia already has Belarus in its pocket. Belarus has to dance to their tune. So here's my statement. Andre, we are currently seeing in world events a run-up, the preparation for the coming Antichrist.
Yes.
The world stage is being prepared for the fulfillment of Bible prophecy.
Amen.
One thing is certain, it is only a matter of time before Russia and its allies, in particularly Turkey, will invade, and Iran will invade Israel. It's just a matter of time. So anyway, this is just my take on that third question that you asked me.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. And it is so important that we understand Bible prophecy so good, because not understanding Bible prophecy will never say that this is what actually going to happen. So that's the only thing we have in until Jesus comes back that will help us to understand how things is going to fit together.
Absolutely, Andre. Absolutely. You are so spot on. In actual fact, I mean, you couldn't have put it better. We are witnessing the fulfillment of biblical prophecy in the end time, getting closer and closer and closer, bringing us closer and closer to the rapture, to the 7-year tribulation, to Armageddon, and Jesus' appearance from heaven. So these things does not happen just because of. I mean, there's angels in heaven, in the heavenlies, fighting these battles at the moment, and we see the armies of the world raging. So this is very, very interesting, Andre. Very interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things going on. I mean, we're talking about Russia and all the stunt countries and things like that. But if you look at between China at the moment and the Solomon Islands and what's happening around those places, is everything is slowly getting, it's a puzzle that's going to fit together, and it's going to bring the end result. That's it.
And yes, and you know, like what happened with Jesus, when Pilate condemned him to the cross, he first sent him to Herod. And the Bible says that day, Herod and Pilate become great friends. Russia is becoming great friends with China at the moment.
Yes.
So it's very interesting that these nations are taking hands, because the Bible tells us of wars that will take place and movement from the east, from Israel. And east of Israel eventually get to India and to China. So does that mean that China will come and fight with the Russians at the end time, at the Battle of Armageddon?
Quite possible. Mean
India? Yeah. And what about India? That's also to the east.
Yeah. And the good thing, what we know is that Jesus is going to put the hooks into them and pull them to Israel, and then he's going to defeat them. Israel is not going to defeat them. It is going to be Jesus himself.
Well, Israel can't defeat the Antichrist. The Antichrist is going to kill 2/3 of the Jews in Jerusalem, according to the prophecies of Zechariah. You're quite right. They're going to need Jesus to come and fight their battles for them.
Oh, yes.
But it was wonderful to talk to you. I think that people that will listen to our program, Andre, they will come to a realization that these things that are happening in the world is not just things that happen per chance. There's things behind the scenes. It's the world stage getting ready for the next stage of end time, a fulfillment of end time Bible prophecy. And me and you, we are living in very exciting times. You know, Andre, I mentioned it to you, I think last year sometime, when we talked about the end time Bible study, and we said, when you read Daniel chapter 12, the angel said, how long before these wonderful things come to fulfillment? So the world say this is scary times, and it is. But also wonderful things is happening in our world today, and we are witnessing it.
Most exciting times of all times. Yeah.
So I know our
Fast.
time has caught up with us, but God willing, next week or the week after, we will meet up again to have a recording. I know next week is tough for you, but we will see how it plays out in the next week or two. Eh?
No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, Pastor Raymond, and we'll talk soon.